This is Gateway City Sports.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?
Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
Brett Brown drops the ball. He drops the ball. There's a drive. Way back. It might be. It could be.
This is the Team of Rivals podcast. No insiders, no anonymous sources, just passionate analysis from the bleacher seats. Here are your hosts.
Good evening, Cubs and Cardinals fans. It's the Team of Rivals podcast. It is Thursday, January 14th, 2021. The president's been impeached. We've got a new president coming in next Wednesday. Fingers crossed there'll be no further domestic instability, but none of that matters right now because tonight we have a special treat for you. Inarguably our best show in the 5 years that this podcast has been in existence. Hopefully you heard the promos or saw the promos throughout the week, but we had a real special treat. Shout out to our super producer, Geno Bonds, Crash STL on Twitter. He was beating the bushes for us and came up with an amazing interview. Ron, Elliott, and I had an opportunity this morning to interview Chip Kerry of the Atlanta Braves, previously of the Chicago Cubs, and we got to cover a wide range of subjects. His time with the Cubs, his reasons for not joining the St. Louis Cardinals, and his view on baseball in general and also on the outlook moving forward for 2021 and beyond. So we hope you enjoyed the podcast. Obviously this one's not live tonight, but we will definitely have more content for you next week. Hope you enjoy. Here's our interview with Chip Kerry.
Here comes the hook. Got him! 20 strikeouts. He ties the Major League record.
All right, Cubs and Cardinals fans, this is an exciting day for us. You've been with us before when we've done some special interviews, but today we're joined by Atlanta Braves broadcaster and former Cubs broadcaster, and even back before that, Seattle Mariners broadcaster, Chip Kerry. Chip, welcome to the Team of Rivals podcast. It's a real honor to have you here with us today.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it. I think everybody who's watching this is familiar with your background, but let's go back to your time with the Cubs. Was it always the plan that that you were eventually going to transition into your grandfather's seat, or was that going to be kind of a temporary thing? Because I know that you had a pretty good gig in Seattle at first.
Yeah, I had a good gig in Seattle. I was working for the Fox National broadcast too. I was their pregame studio host. They hired me while I was doing the Orlando Magic basketball game. So at one point I was doing Orlando basketball, Fox National stuff, and Seattle Mariners baseball. I lived pretty much on an airplane for 12 months out of the year. But really the plan was for me to have an apprenticeship, if you will. Nothing was promised to me in Chicago other than they hired me originally to do all the road games. At least almost all the road games. There were some trips that my grandfather still wanted to make to St. Louis and occasionally to New York. But I was going to do the bulk of the road games with Steve Stone. And then in Chicago, I was going to do the middle three innings and host the leadoff man show and the 10th inning show, or the post-game show on WGN. And during that time, I would see if I was going to be a fit for the market, if it was going to be a fit for me personally. And that was the job to which I had agreed in December of 97. My grandfather, of course, had his accident in 98 around Valentine's Day, and that all quickly changed. They had already hired me. They knew that I had my obligations with basketball. They knew I had my obligations with Fox. So they had to work around that for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the regular season. But then it settled in that it was Steve Stone and me for our run in Chicago. But it was never really preordained that the job was going to be mine. Like anything else, I had an opportunity. I had to go earn it. And I feel pretty proud of the fact that both Steve and I were able to do that over a long period of time up there.
So kind of related to that, and this is just to dig the knife in a little for Ron and all of our Cardinals followers. You got offered the job to join the Cardinals broadcast team in 1994 and then decided not to. What was the thinking there, other than knowing that you'd be going to an inferior market?
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, so I'm still a huge Cardinal fan. I have a lot of friends there, family there. Heck, half my family's buried there, for God's sakes. It's still home. My mom lives in St. Clair, Missouri, which is about 45 miles outside of St. Louis, down I-44. Financial, that was a big part of it. Look, I was 29 years old. I was in Orlando. I'd been established in the NBA. I was doing some national work for TBS and TNT, doing roughly 80 games. And the financial offer that the Cardinals made was for less money for more work, and I'd have to live in St. Louis. I was living in Florida at the time. Obviously, there are economic and tax benefits of that, and I did not take turning that job down lightly. But at some point, you have to be able to feed yourself and feed your family. And for what I was going to be paid doing that job, it wasn't a fit. I regret that in many respects because, look, I understand the enormity of a job like that in Chicago. I understand the enormity of a job like St. Louis. They are incredibly passionate fans. Hell, I grew up one of them. You know, in my age, you knew the starting lineup of the '64 Cardinals World Series team before you knew the ABCs. But at that time, I could not make that move for myriad reasons. And ultimately, it turned out to be the right move because it led me to Chicago, it led me to Fox, and it led me back to Atlanta, where I've been now for a long period of time. So everything happens for a reason. We just couldn't make a deal at that time. And Cardinal fans are really lucky. They've got a terrific guy in Dan McLaughlin doing their games on TV. Danny's a great broadcaster and a great friend, and I'm really, really happy for him.
We'll be speaking to him next week, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, perfect. Good.
Yeah.
He's a great dude.
God, you would think that we had planned all of this to help promote next week's show.
No, if only we were that good. Chip, sometimes
you guys send me the script.
Sometimes it's I tell some of my employees that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And so I think that we've been lucky these 2 weeks to get you guys on here. So there's one thing in particular I wanted to ask you because I think it's unique, and that was going back to 1998. The home run chase. You were there in St. Louis when Mark McGwire passes number 61, and you had to turn right back around and call that all over again, literally just like within a week, again up in Chicago. And you may have been one of the few announcers, maybe the only broadcast team besides the radio guys that had to call that twice. So what was that like? Because I would just envision you wait. We've all waited years and decades for anybody to get near that record and then finally break it. And it finally happens. You're like, whoa, it's happening again. Like just within a matter of days. It had to be strange.
It was strange, but obviously when the second guy does it, it's not as exciting as when the first guy does it. When Mark McGwire broke Roger Maris's record in St. Louis and we were there, that was one of the coolest broadcasting moments of my life, not because of what Mark McGwire did. And look, we can go back and revisit ancient history and say what he did and what we know now we didn't know or suspected back then. That's not the point of my comment. What made it so fun was you remember at the time how much conversation was about who's going to catch the ball, how much money they're going to sell it for, will Mark McGwire get it, or will Sammy Sosa, all that silliness that took place. And if you remember the trajectory of that home run ball that just crept over the fence in left field, one of the grounds crew guys picked it up and brought it back to home plate and handed it to McGwire. And that gesture of goodwill earned the kid a college scholarship, a car, all kinds of financial reward just for doing the right thing. That was one of the cool parts of that story. The celebration on the field with Sammy Sosa and Mark and their families, and that great show of sportsmanship. It was as close to the hockey handshake, I think, as baseball is ever going to see when that moment took place. But for me personally, the coolest moment was not calling the home run play, but watching to my left. At Old Busch Stadium, you had Joe Buck doing the game with Tim McCarver for Fox. And then further down was the KMOX radio booth. And Jack Buck was there. And Jack, as we know, at that stage in his life was not doing well. His health was not good, but he still was broadcasting the games. And as we all do, was laying it on the line. You bare your soul every time you take to a microphone in professional sports or otherwise for that matter. And Jack, with his Parkinson's, calls the home run and then stands up and starts clapping. And as he does, I look over and notice that he has tears streaming down his face. Jack Buck was a family friend of ours. He was incredibly instrumental in my love affair with broadcasting. I grew up in St. Louis and listened to him with the transistor radio under my pillow. But to see Jack Buck react that way to, as your point, Ron, a record that we never, ever thought was going to be broken, knowing that Jack Buck knew Roger Maris, knowing that Jack Buck probably grew up idolizing Babe Ruth like anybody his age would have, to see that record fall, to be able to have that call happen in St. Louis with the Cubs in town, with Sammy Sosa, with the Maris family. It's, I think, what helps us reaffirm our love affair with baseball. It was just one of those magical moments that you couldn't have scripted even if you attempted to. And the natural course of events was so much better than the fantasy of what someone could have come up with. So it was a great night. It was a fantastic moment for baseball. Fantastic moment for Mark McGwire, a great moment for both the Cubs and Cardinals because of what they did. And ultimately, at the end of the year, the Cubs got the last laugh. They went to the playoffs that year, and the Cardinals did. So it was a great September. It was a great moment, and one, as I said, I'll never forget.
So going back to that 98 year, you had 3 historic calls, history-making calls. Which was the coolest one? The McGwire record breaker, the Sosa record breaker, or Kerry Wood's insane game in May?
Kerry Wood's game. For me, again, personally, that was kind of my coming out party. I've been doing the games for the Cubs for a while by that time, and I've been, I think, for the most part, accepted in the marketplace. They knew I wasn't Harry, and nobody could be. But here you had this young, unproven talent, a guy that nobody knew a whole lot about. They'd read about and wondered what he was going to be, kind of like the guy behind the microphone. And on that May day in Chicago, he comes out and has the game of his life. And if you go back and look at the baseball scorecards of how they grade big league games, that is the most dominant game ever pitched in the major leagues, ever. Think about that. Think of the number of games this sport has seen. No hitters, perfect games, and all that. Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout, 1 hit game is the most dominant pitching performance the sport has ever seen. And we were lucky enough to be there. And I think because it was on WGN, because I had Steve Stone there, and because it was so out of the blue and unexpected, I think people realized that we were good enough to let the moment speak for itself. We got out of the way and we highlighted and encapsulated all the right moments. And, when you're sitting in that chair that we sit in, you hope when the big moment comes, you don't screw it up. And Lord knows I've done that before. But here comes the hook. He throws the slider, the big curveball. Derek Bell or whoever it was swings and misses, and that was the record. That just kind of became one of the iconic calls for the Cubs. And I was just lucky enough to be there at the time and cemented that moment in a way that was memorable. So for me, the Kerry Wood 20 strikeout game, because I don't think we'll ever see one quite that way, done by such a young, unproven talent in that kind of marketplace on that kind of stage anytime soon.
And when did you and Stoney have a sense that he had it working and that you were witnessing something special?
Well, pretty much right away. I think his first or second pitch of the game hit the umpire in the mask because the catcher couldn't catch the ball. That was kind of funny. Second or third inning, you just see these unbelievable strikeouts. And Steve was commenting on how his curveball was floating like a wiffle ball. The Astros had a great team that year. They went to the playoffs. They had Bell, Biggio, Bagwell, Ricky Gutierrez. They had Shane Reynolds. I mean, they were loaded. And they were missing not by inches, but by multiple inches. They were swinging. They could have swung a canoe paddle up there and wouldn't have had a chance to hit Kerry Wood that day. His breaking ball was so unbelievably good. And then you throw 98 miles an hour and can put it pretty much wherever you want. He was in command. He was effectively wild. And from the second or third inning on, we knew that something special was going on. And to that point, back in the old days when you had AOL instant messaging, that was before we had texts and cell phones the way we have them now. People were dinging in saying, I was out doing gardening. I came in the 4th inning and he said Kerry Wood had 11 strikeouts or 12 strikeouts or whatever it was. And so they stopped doing what they did to watch the final 3-4 innings of the game. So the audience grew, the anticipation grew, and Kerry was able to finish it off. The only disappointing thing of that night was, or that day, I should say, was Craig Biggio was not going to strike out in the 9th inning of that game. There was no way he was going to whiff. He put the first ball in play and first or second ball in play, grounded out, and you could hear the audible groan from the ballpark because they knew that Kerry couldn't get to 21. The most strikeouts he could get was 20. But that tells you all about Craig Biggio, the ultimate competitor. He was not going to let Kerry Wood get the all-time record against his club on that day at Wrigley Field.
So going from one of the highs of your time with the Cubs to one of the lows, Greg Maddux, Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor, Carlos Zambrano, Matt Clement, Glendon Rush with a ridiculous season off the bench as the swingman. And then 7 of the regular 9 starters had OPS plus over 100. Corey Patterson missed it by only 5. They had 4 players with 30-plus home runs, 5 with 20 or more. What the hell happened in 2004?
They got hurt. I think I don't have my baseball encyclopedia and I don't have my brain turned on to the 04 Cubs at the moment, but if I remember correctly, many of those principals got hurt or underperformed. Look, as you guys know, Chicago's a big town, the city of big shoulders, but that comes with big expectations. And after what they almost accomplished in 03, the team that Jim Hendry put together in 2004 was on paper better than that 03 team. They just didn't play particularly well. They sort of muddled around. They dealt with injuries. They just could not seem to find their footing and put together a great run. They were in the race until September, but never could seem to get over the hump and play up to what was either expected of them or what everyone thought they were going to be able to do as a group. That was very disappointing. It was a frustrating year personally and professionally, as I'm sure you guys will want to talk about, which is fine. But the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, nobody remembers what happened. They remember whether you did it or not. And sadly, the legacy of the 04 Cubs team is that they didn't win. They didn't do it. And they couldn't follow up to 2003. And after that 04 season, there were an awful lot of changes there. And, it took them a long time to get their footing back underneath them. But great players, great personality, still a lot of good friends that played on that team and managed that team. But no doubt about it, 04 was a gigantic disappointment for all of us compared to the excitement and the promise of what October in 2003 offered.
Well, it certainly seemed like there was a real dysfunctional clubhouse going on there, at least to Cubs fans. And I think that manifested itself in what you alluded to, the ridiculous relationship that they had with the broadcast booth. Was that team as dysfunctional as they appeared? And if so, is that the most dysfunctional team you've covered?
I don't know if dysfunctional is a fair word. I think disappointing is a fair word. Look, it's easy to blame other people for your own failures. And I think that's something that was allowed to happen, in my opinion. Neither Steve Stone nor I threw a pitch, caught a ground ball, swung and missed, hit a home run, knocked over a water cooler in the dugout. None of that stuff happened. Our job was to describe what took place. And we were very fair and very honest about what we saw and what Steve analyzed. And the bottom line is that we were not willing, and I'm still not willing, to sacrifice my credibility for the hurt feelings of a player who's not playing well. Because those same players who might be critical of your work when things are going poorly are never first in line to come up and say thank you when things go well. So their job at the end of the day was not to critique the broadcasters. Their job was to win baseball games, and they didn't do enough of that. And I mentioned, in fairness to them, the team that they envisioned having was really the team they didn't have for most of that season. So dysfunctional, I don't think that's a fair word. Disappointing is a fair word, because I think it spiraled out of control and never should have gotten that way. But I think that was born out of frustration by the players. I think that was born out of the frustration of the expectations of the fan and media, as I alluded to earlier. It's a big city. You got to put your big boy pants on to broadcast games in Chicago and to play there and to take the big money and all the accolades that come with, and rightfully so, being a Chicago Cub. Some guys handled that a lot better than others. And unfortunately, it spilled over and became a convenient thing for them to pin on other people instead of their own inabilities to perform at the level that people thought they were capable of.
As a Cardinals fan, I enjoyed the 2004 season in particular.
I'm sure you did.
It was a wonderful year. That was a fun team to watch until, of course, they ran into the unstoppable Red Sox in that World Series. But
right.
The Cardinals did a lot of counter punching in that offseason. I think due to the Cubs' success in 03, they made the deal to get Adam Wainwright, Jason Marquis, and Ray King over. They signed Jeff Suppan, brought in Reggie Sanders, brought in a player I constantly forget about it, but I loved him when I was there that one season, Tony Womack as leadoff hitter for second base. And that team was, I think, a little bit opposite. It was a little surprising. We knew we had a good core, but I didn't expect them to win 105 games. But I don't know about you guys. I love the 04 season.
Yeah, I liked the 04 season was fine from that standpoint as a St. Louis native. I liked everything you said except the Wainwright trade. That's one that I'm not real happy about as a Braves guy now. That one didn't work out so well for Atlanta. But look, that's what makes the Cubs-Cardinal thing so great. I know people around the national media, in my humble opinion, talk about, the storied Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. Okay, great. That's a region. But the Cardinals and Cubs rivalry really was, to a certain degree, a nationwide thing, because you had WGN TV and the nationwide broadcast. And going back to the old days in the 50s and 60s, before we had a ton of television, the KMOX radio signal went from St. Louis north to the Canadian border, west to the Rockies, south to the Rio Grande. And when I was in college and my first job was in Panama City, Florida, I would be in Panama City listening to the Blues hockey games on KMOX radio, and I could hear that clearer than WSB radio, which was in Atlanta and probably 500 miles closer. So my point is, there was a Cardinal nation and there was a Cubs nation, and it wasn't just the region. of the Yankees and Red Sox, which is what we have now and is shoved down our throat ad nauseum by the national networks. That's what made those games so much fun. 18, 19 times a year, anything could happen. And the rivalry was so great, so passionate, so fun. I mean, watching Dusty Baker and Tony La Russa screaming at each other from the dugout was awesome. Watching Scott Rowland lay down the first and I think only sacrificed bunt of his career in a doubleheader at Wrigley Field that knocked the Cubs out of the playoffs and sent the Cardinals on their way in 2004 was unbelievable. Watching Albert Pujols come up as an outfielder, if I'm not mistaken, in his early days with the Cardinals, and watching him just absolutely rake. And then for the Cubs, Sosa and Wood and Pryor and Zambrano. I mean, that's what made that rivalry so fun. And it's really great for baseball. When the Cubs and Cardinals are good, it's really, really good for the game. And I'm hoping that that's going to continue somehow, some way in what looks to be a crazy National League Central in 2021.
Yeah, we've talked plenty about the condition of the National League Central, but I agree, Chip, that some of my most memorable seasons aren't actually when St. Louis came out on top. 2003 was still fun to watch. I remember all the way back into 1989 when it was all the way, I think, until the last 2 games of the season, and it was a race. The Cubs ended up winning the division, but those are years I remember because, gosh, I have blood relatives that are Cub fans, if you can believe that. I mean, I come from a region in central Illinois, it's 50-50, almost every town, Peoria, right. Canton is where I'm from, Bloomington, it's a split. So I've grown up in this, and so those seasons are very memorable.
Yeah, well, and you make an excellent point. You know, those towns in southern Illinois right across the river, I'll never forget, we had Dick Durbin, the senator from Illinois, come in and sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And he said, "Hey, please, whatever you do, don't ask me who I'm rooting for, because half of my constituency comes from downstate, and I don't want to piss off half the people that might be voting for me." And of course, the first question I asked, "Who are you rooting for in the series, Dick?" So he laughed about that. But no, I don't think. Again, me personally, I don't think of the great seasons. I think of the great players and the great moments, and that's what makes our sport so special. As you said, Ron, you can have a bad year, but you can have a player have a spectacular season that makes that season so memorable for you. And that's the beauty of baseball. That's what makes it so much fun. And our job as broadcasters is to inform and entertain you, even when your team's not necessarily good enough to get to the playoffs. You've got to keep people engaged over 162 games. And as one of my bosses has said really, really well, we're wedding photographers. And it's not our job to comment on the bride's dress necessarily. It's not our job to predict what they're going to be doing 5 years from now or how many kids they are. Our job that day is to capture that moment and then develop a theme that becomes the theme for the season and put a nice, neat bow on it at the end of the year. And I think that's what makes a good broadcast. That's what makes it enjoyable and entertaining for the fans, because each day is a snapshot in the life of a baseball team. And as we've seen so often, like snowflakes, there's no 2 games in baseball that are exactly the same.
Well said.
So go ahead, Elliott.
Pardon my tardiness. E-learning with the 6-year-old.
We already warned him, Elliott. We already told him, Elliott.
We've come to expect it.
I know. So, Elliott Dewey, thanks for doing this. Pleasure to meet you.
Me too, Elliott.
So, guys, go ahead.
Well, continuing with the transition into the Cardinals, obviously there's a current connection with Marcelo Ozuna moving from St. Louis to Atlanta on a 1-year deal last year. He looked like a completely different hitter in Atlanta last year versus when he was in St. Louis. And you're close. What changed for him? Was he just more comfortable in the lineup? Ron attributes it to having more thunder around him, but you were there to call all the games. What do you attribute it to, his breakout again?
I think Ron's got it partly right. Number one, he's healthy. His shoulder was fine. I think that was a problem that plagued him in St. Louis at the end of his tenure with the Cardinals. Look, Marcelo is probably not a Gold Glove outfielder, and that's probably putting it kindly. I think the DH is a perfect role for him if it continues in the National League, which it's insane to me that we don't know what rules we're going to be playing, and pitchers and catchers are showing up in 5 weeks. I mean, talk about idiocy. But that aside, yeah, he had a lot of thunder around him. He had Freddie Freeman, the MVP of the league, batting right in front of him. He has Acuna. He has Albies. Dansby Swanson had a breakout year. Travis d'Arnaud had a fantastic season. This is a very deep and dangerous Atlanta lineup when they're right. And as we know in the game now, you trade strikeouts for the power potential, and Ozuna certainly provided that. Off the field, my intelligence has told me, and by that I mean not my smarts, but the people that are around the team, we were not allowed to be around him, as you know. He was such a great fit in the clubhouse, it's almost like he'd been there forever. And he was really in the middle of things. Freeman loved him. Albies and Acuna loved him. He was just a great, personable guy. And a lot of that comes from him playing well and having a good year. So I'm sure you're begging the question, which is, will he be back? The answer to that is, well, I really don't know. I think a lot of that depends on what rules we play under, not just for this year, but what, if anything, is foretold about the future of baseball and the DH in the National League. I don't think the Braves or really any National League team envisions Marcelo being 150 a game year outfielder, although that's what Atlanta signed him to do last year. And then obviously you've got the financial considerations. I don't know what kind of money Marcelo is going to want, but if it's 25, 30 million a year, that might be too big a pill for the Braves to swallow, especially knowing that they've got to re-up Freddie Freeman, whose contract is up after this year. And as I said, he's only the MVP of the league. So in a perfect world, yeah, Ozuna's back. We have the DH or a partial DH, as Jason Stark talked about in his column today, or at least we have some certainty and know what rules we're going to play under. Because if I'm Marcelo Ozuna or Nelson Cruz or any of the other DH candidates, I'm kind of angry right now that baseball hasn't gotten its act together so that they know what their marketplace is. Because believe me, Ozuna and Cruz and their agents want a market of 30 potential teams as opposed to 15 as it stands right now. And I don't know that teams are going to be willing to jump in and offer 3 or 4 year deals to guys who are turning into or trending into DH type players if we're not going to have one in the National League. So a lot of stuff is in flux, unbelievably and inexplicably. Hopefully that's going to be cleared up here in the next couple of days, if not couple of weeks, because it's time to start thinking about baseball, not figuring out what rules we're playing under. That's got to change post-haste, I think.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. We've had that discussion too, that the fact that they haven't informed these teams that role is going to exist in the National League in 21, and instead perhaps holding it as a bargaining chip one side or the other for 2022. But I think I'm going to save it because we have a segment kind of up here talking about kind of the future of baseball. So I'm going to kick it over to Elliott. He had a question.
Yeah. So with the uncertainty of Chris Bryant, there has been some pretty recent rumors that he may be heading down to your area. So I don't know if you hear anything out there or how would you enjoy having him on the Atlanta Braves?
I have not heard that. From what I've read, they're going to give Austin Riley a chance to play. Austin's a minimum salary guy. Chris Bryant's not. The Braves are a team with their pitching staff. They are a very heavy defensive-minded metric team. Chris Bryant's defensive metrics at third base, if I'm to believe them, are not particularly great. Now, you can put Chris Bryant in the outfield, but I don't know if that's something the Braves want to do on a daily basis. And as we've seen from Alex Anthopoulos, who's never been afraid to make a big splash, Alex has really held his powder dry. He has not gone out and traded big-time prospects to go make a big splash deal. And frankly, he hasn't had to. The Braves have won the division the last 3 years. And if history is any indication, they give their young players a chance to play. We've seen it with Acuna, Freeman, Pache, Albies. The list goes on and on. You're probably going to have William Contreras, Wilson's little brother, as the backup catcher this year. And Austin Riley made tremendous strides last year from an offensive standpoint. He's not a bad outfielder either if you had to play him out there. So I can't remember what Chris Bryant's making, but I guarantee it's on the order of hundreds of times more than what Austin Riley is making for probably pretty similar production. So I would be very surprised if that's the kind of deal that the Braves would make. I think they're more looking for an outfielder at this point and maybe to supplement their bullpen. I think that's where those dollars are going to go because I think they feel comfortable with Austin Riley and Johan Camargo playing third base in the outfield in some capacity in 2021.
Chip, what do you think about that elusive button over there? Chip, what do you think about some of the noise that the Mets are making? They're under new ownership now. They just made a big deal for Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco. From a distance, at least in the National League Central, it was kind of fun at times. There was a rivalry between New York and Atlanta, a big-time rivalry there for a while. So how do you feel about the Mets and the moves they're making?
Yeah, I'll say the same thing about Lindor that I said to Derek Jeter to his face when he was retiring to the Yankees. I hate the Mets, but it's really hard to hate Francisco Lindor. Like I hate the Yankees, and it's hard to hate Derek Jeter. Same kind of deal. As a Braves fan, I'm not happy with the fact that they got Lindor. As a baseball fan, I'm thrilled that I get to see this kid play 19 times. He's a star in the making if he's not already, and that is the perfect stage for him and his talents. And as I said about the Cubs and Cardinals, when the Mets and Yankees are good, it's good for baseball. Look, say what you will about the Wilpons. They were tremendous stewards for the franchise. but Steve Cohen has a much bigger wallet, and he's not going to be afraid to use it. That's why the Mets are a big market, and they're acting like a big market team. I think that ups the ante for the Phillies, the Nationals, the Braves, and the Marlins to either match them dollar for dollar or be smarter and wiser in how they draft and develop their players. And I have a great deal of confidence that the Braves will be able to do both of those things. But look, it's good for the players that the Cohen group is going to spend money and bring in talented guys to New York. It's ultimately going to be good for the game because more eyeballs on the Mets means more eyeballs on our team. But make no doubt about it, a guy like Lindor for the New York Mets with that pitching staff and Carrasco and DeGrom and Syndergaard and Matz, that makes them a lot more difficult to beat in the National League East. So it's going to be a fun race. We're excited for the challenge. I'm sure the Braves players are, and I'm excited as a fan to be able to watch it unfold.
So what do you think, Chip? NL East looks like it's probably going to be loaded, especially if the Mets land George Springer. The West is going nuts, at least with the top two teams. Which division is going to be more competitive and more of a dogfight, the West or the East? What do you think?
Well, I always go with the one that has the most pitching top to bottom, and that's the National League East. I just mentioned the Mets rotation, the Nationals, Corbin, Strasburg, and Max Scherzer. That's not too shabby. Even the Marlins, who made the playoffs, they have terrific young starting pitching. Not many people know about Sixto Sanchez and Edward Cabrera, and on we go. But they're growing and getting better. Pablo Lopez, one of the best young right-handers that not many people know about. The Phillies, I think, are a question mark. They've gone with offense. I don't think they have enough pitching, although Zach Wheeler pitched well for them. Spencer Howard's going to be better. He'll go through the league a second time and figure things out. Joe Girardi is going to have a much better bullpen. That's been a disaster there for the last couple of years. And for us in Atlanta, we're excited. We've added Charlie Morton, a former Brave, Drew Smiley, two veteran guys to eat up innings. And then you have Max Fried. You have Mike Soroka, who's going to come back at some point from his Achilles. Bryce Wilson, who pitched well for Atlanta, and on. So Kyle Wright, the kid from Vanderbilt, who threw great in the postseason too. So the Braves have a lot of deep young talent, and I think that's what sets up Atlanta so uniquely going forward. Is the core of their team is their pitching staff. They have good, young, inexpensive, controllable starting pitchers who, by the way, have track records. And when you have that, when you pitch, we can talk about all the other stuff, sabermetrics and everything else. It's really a simple game, crazy numbers or not. If you pitch well, you have a great chance to win. If you don't, you have no chance. And the Braves feel very good about the rotation they've assembled. There's even more of that stuff coming. And that's why I think the Braves are going to be relevant in the East for not just this year, but for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it's really been the Cardinals' way. They've been competitive
Absolutely.
the last couple of years. It's been run prevention, right? Because they haven't had much of an offense, but the Braves have the offense to go on top of that run prevention. So
and the defense too. I mean, look, you've got Freddie Freeman, who won the first ever Gold Glove as a Braves first baseman a couple of years ago. Ozzie Albies should have won a Gold Glove. Dansby Swanson's no slouch at shortstop. You've got Acuna in the outfield, probably right field. Christian Pache, who debuted in the playoffs last year for Atlanta as a teenager, is probably going to be in center. And then they figure out left field with a platoon or go out and get a guy via trade. The Braves, as you said, they're as I said, they're a defensive-minded metric team, and Ron Washington, their third base coach, has a big hand in that with Sal Fasano, the catching coach. If you can't catch the ball, you're going to have trouble playing for Atlanta, no matter how much you hit, and that's of course assuming there's no DH. But that's a big part of Atlanta's success. Run prevention is hugely important. If you know you're only going to give up 2, that means you only have to score 3, and I think that's how they approach it.
Chip, thinking about the future of baseball. Obviously, in normal operations, we would be hearing about the start of negotiations on the new CBA. But obviously, the 2020 summer and the pandemic and everything threw that for a loop. Owners and players already weren't on good terms because of the fallout from the last CBA. So what do you think? Is the 2022 season going to happen, or do you think we're going to see some kind of labor action?
I can't answer that. I don't know. If I had a crystal ball, I would say, yeah, of course it's going to happen. I'm the eternal optimist. I'm of the mind that no news is good news at this point. I assume that they're discussing, as we mentioned earlier, the framework for how we're going to play in 2021. Those kinds of civil discussions could probably lead to more civil discussions about what's going to happen after 2021. At least that's my hope. I would just say this as a cautionary tale. I am an independent contractor. I am not employed by the team. I'm employed by a TV network. And when games aren't played, I don't get paid. I took a 70% pay cut this year. That was completely and totally unexpected. It wasn't anybody's fault, but it happened. I am not asking anyone to feel sorry for me or anyone else in my business, but there are production people who endured the same kind of draconian suffering because of the pandemic. Again, I'm not placing any blame. But if owners and players do not understand and have the ability to read the room as what's happening around our society and around the world with people losing businesses, losing their livelihoods, losing their lives in a pandemic, and they can't get together and are fighting over merely money over how big of a piece of a gigantic pie each side feels like they're entitled to get, I think that's going to be a tremendous problem. And I think that'll be far more damaging than anything else that could happen in the game. You don't fight over money in a pandemic, and you don't fight over money when people are going bankrupt because they can't and are not allowed to open up their businesses. So I'm hoping that baseball's players and owners and the union leadership recognizes that. That's just my personal opinion. I think it would be awful for the sport if we have a protracted labor or a protracted public labor fight. I firmly believe that both sides should fight for what they think is right, but keep it out of the newspapers if you can, because that's where 90% of the problems start. If they can negotiate behind the scenes, get something done, obviously that would be tremendous. But as I said, I think personally, no news is good news. Perhaps they're talking. I have no knowledge of that. I would assume that they would have to be, because I think they all realize what's at stake here. And that's not just the livelihood of baseball going forward in 2021, but its relevance in our society in 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, a concern of, that's well said. A concern of mine, and I'm not as optimistic as I should be, but the last normal baseball season we went into, guys, was 2019, and 2020 was delayed. 2021, we kind of have an unknown going in, although we're being told we're going to have a full season. 2022 has a potential to have a delay as well. It could be from 2019 to 23 before we go into a normal offseason and have normal baseball where we have no other distractions. And that's a little scary to me because I just worry about the interest level in the game.
Well, that's an excellent point. I think that as we found with other sports, when people are home and by themselves and they don't have, shall we say, spare income to go to a baseball game, they found other things to do. Look at the NBA ratings. And there are other reasons, I'm sure, that have to do with the NBA's precipitous rating decline, but the NFL ratings. I think people thought that, everybody's going to be trapped at home. We're going to have this gigantic boom in viewership. No, people found other stuff to do. They rode bikes, they read books, they worked on internet-based businesses. They did other things besides stay glued to their television sets. And I don't think our sport or any sport can avoid a long-term protracted shutdown or interruption of business. And look, let's face it, from a business standpoint, and this is where I do agree with the owners, it's very difficult to run a business when you can't have your paying customers come see your product, right? You can get your TV rights fees and that's fine, but if people aren't watching, you're not going to get the ad rates that you guarantee people. So we got to have fans in the ballpark. We have to do it safely and smartly. I think we're getting to that point with vaccines coming. That's going to be a huge burden off of everyone's shoulders. And I think baseball proved that if in the midst of a pandemic, we can pull off a 60-game schedule with vaccines and a much greater ability to understand what this virus is and isn't. It seems to me that baseball and all the other sports are going to return more quickly to normalcy than perhaps we ever thought possible. That in large part because of the vaccine, which many of the experts said was never going to happen. So again, I'm an optimist by nature. I'm hopeful that we'll get some peace of mind. We'll get people back in the ballpark because, look, we do this for the fans. At the end of the day, it isn't about money for me. It's about entertaining and informing the fans who love our sport and talking baseball with people. And the sooner we can get back to that, then the sooner we can talk about the revenue streams and who's supposed to get what and what's fair and what's not. But without the fans, it's not nearly as much fun and it's not nearly as satisfying as I've become accustomed to.
Your lips to God's ears, Chip. I know you had a question that you wanted to throw out there.
I kind of wanted to go back to some of the young players that are on the Atlanta Braves and kind of coinciding with when Bryce Harper first came up. He had that attitude, kind of the let the kids play, and he kind of got killed about it a little bit during the time. And, Atlanta's got a lot of these really great young players with Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna. For you, for broadcasting, has that changed at all since the attitudes of like the non-traditional players when the bat flipping and all that has come along?
No question. My partners have changed too. I work with Joe Simpson, who is, and I say this in a very, very complimentary way. He's as old school as they get. You don't show up your opponent. You don't show up the game. You hit a home run, you put your head down, and you run around the bases. The game has changed. I work now with Jeff Francoeur, who was sort of at the tail end of that traditionalists and then the let the kids play starting up era. And it doesn't bother him nearly as much. And looking at it, it doesn't bother me at all. I can't change it. I can't affect whether a player does that or not. But if a pitcher is going to get pissed if a guy hits a home run, well, make better pitches. If a batter is going to get pissed if a pitcher strikes out, well, put the ball in play. I mean, it seems to be kind of playground common sense that takes place. And as long as the rules are even and nobody can get mad, then what are we really arguing about? Look, at the end of the day, we have a economic fight for every entertainment dollar we can get. And we know it's the 18 to 34 guy or gal who loves sports, who wants to be entertained. And I think, and I don't want to sound like an old fart here, the way that I grew up watching baseball, that's gone the way of the dodo. It's not coming back. It's not coming back anytime soon. So you can do one of two things. You can bang your head against the wall and scream to the heavens, this isn't right, this is not how we should play, or stick your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't happen. Or you can embrace it and just call it as you see it. I don't have to like it. And I think there are a lot of people who don't like it. I think there are a lot of very sanguine, very smart, very current hip players who don't like it. But you're not going to change it. That genie is out of the bottle. So our job is to, if Acuna hits a home run, bat flips, point out the bat flip, and keep an eye on the game the rest of the way. And if there's an issue that pops up later on, then you have a basis for what took place. So I'm not a super proponent of the let the kids play stuff, because I think it leads to problems. Urania and Acuna come to mind immediately. But I'm also one that's not going to trash the game because a guy flips his bat or shows some emotion. I think for far too long, in many ways, baseball's been somewhat robotic and unemotional in the first place. And I think people want to see those stories. They want to see how guys react and how they feel. And nothing pumps up a big crowd than Bryce Harper hitting a game-winning home run and he pumps his fist. Kirk Gibson's walk-off home run against Dennis Eckersley, all that kind of stuff. That's what people want to see. I don't want to see a robot all the time. I just want to see it done right and done in an appropriate fashion at the appropriate time. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, I've come a long way in those regards. I used to not be a fan of the bat flip or anything else. I've completely turned the other way around on that one, because you're right, Chip. I mean, this is going to sound bad coming from me, but if you want kind of robotic baseball, honestly, when the Cardinals product that I've seen the last couple of years has been a little bit that way. It has had a little bit less personality, especially when you take a guy like Ozuna out of the clubhouse and Jose Martinez. Many times they don't appear to be having too much fun. I don't think it has anything to do with the record. I think it's just my perception of what I'm seeing on TV. I've completely went the other way around. I like to see that emotion. As long as it's genuine and it's in the moment, I don't have a problem with it anymore. Boy, I used to be the biggest fan of seeing Scott Rowland hit a home run and just sprint around the bases, no emotion at all. Like, man, that's the way baseball should be played. I've completely went the other way. So we can all, and I'm an older guy too. But I had a question, Chip, though. The game is being played a little bit different today than it was. And I'm sure every generation sees the same thing, where things are a little bit different than what you grew up with. What is your feel about just some of the hitters and how they're approaching the game? And Atlanta might be an exception to this one, because I think they have a really good offense, really good hitting team. But I just see a lot of strikeouts are up, walks are up. I have a 15-year-old that loves baseball just as much as I did when I was 15. He tells me in the summer, somewhere now, he's like, Dad, he's like, I've been struggling to get through watching games. These are really boring. And so I don't think he's alone. I think a lot of people have that kind of sentiment. But what's your take on that?
I couldn't agree more. Look, this is going to come off as me bashing analytics, and I'm not bashing analytics in any way, shape, or form. Look, I want every edge I can get. I want as much information as I get to make my broadcast better, or if I'm running a team, to make my team better, or if I'm a manager, finding a way to have an edge to win that game. I get it. Information is gold. It's worth a lot of money, and it's hard to get, and it's hard to process. My sense is that there are a lot of players today who are relying on analytics as their main source of preparation for the game. And, go back to the World Series when Kevin Cash took his starting pitcher out of Game 6 of the World Series because he was not going to see him the third time through, despite the fact he's dominating. That didn't pass the eye test, and it cost them the World Series. I think there's paralysis by analysis in a lot of ways. I mean, we get, before our game, we get a sheaf of notes that is, 50, 60 pages of notes and numbers and everything else. And if I tried to use that stuff in a broadcast, the audience's eyes would glaze over. It's surreal to them, right? And I'm not saying it's not valid information. It's about picking the right information. And at some point, again, I'm not an athlete. I didn't play professional baseball, but see ball, hit ball, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And from a fan's perspective, the game needs more action. Last year, I saw one hit and run. One.
Yeah.
One.
It's a rarity. It's like the home run used to be.
Right. And so I'm not saying home runs aren't great. They are. But at the end of the day, you got to put the ball in play, and you've got to, I want to see stolen bases. If fans think the no contact rule at second base is because there was so much heavy contact at second base bag on a double play, go back and look at the Yankees and Royals World Series or ALCS highlights when Willie Randolph gets knocked into left field on a late hard slide at the second base bag and the runner wasn't called out or thrown out of the game. I'm not advocating guys getting hurt. I'm not advocating guys taking cheap shots, but I am saying that baseball's got to get back to being baseball. As Steve Stone said, it's a tough guy played by tough men. And the things that made baseball great and make it accessible to people of all sizes is everybody can do something to help their team win. Hit the ball to right field, put the ball in play, not strike out, make a good throw. All of those things add up to a team winning a game. And I think a lot of it has gone walk, strikeout, or homer in large part because of analytics, but also because the pitchers are bigger and stronger and are throwing harder at max effort for longer than they ever have before. And, that's I don't know how you put that genie back in the bottle either, but the days of pitching instead of throwing need to get back to that. Need to get back, in my opinion, to the fundamentals of the game, taking risks on the bases, making the other team react to what you do, forcing the action. And when that happens, and when you have those kinds of games, again, in my 56-year-old man's opinion, that's when the beauty of baseball really, really blossoms and blooms before our eyes.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's that paralysis analysis. Yeah. But I was so good. In fact, I was such a good player. I remember swinging at a pitch out once. So that see-ball, hit ball, I couldn't even do that. So
right. Well, and that's why I say this. And again, I say this with great respect and admiration. I don't know how anybody ever gets a hit in Major League Baseball. I really don't. These guys are so good. And the pitcher's stuff is so ridiculously good. And I've said this on the air to my partners. It's miraculous that anybody ever gets a hit. But that said, you don't have to get a hit to help your team. And putting the ball in play instead of striking out, for me, gives you a chance to do something or something happening that could benefit you. Striking out, it's an empty out.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And, Chip, I think that's a great point. Not only does it help your team win more, but it also makes it more interesting for the fans to watch because you don't know what's going to happen from play to play.
Of course, and that's again, as I said, it's a wedding shot. You don't know what the bride and groom are going to do after they say I do. That's why a photographer's there, to catch those moments. That's why we're there, to see what's going to happen. When you go to a game and we're going to strike it. It's kind of like the old days with the DH, and I'm not bashing the DH, but the visiting team would come in. We're going to beat the crap out of your pitchers, get to your bullpen. Then you're going to beat the crap out of our starting pitcher, get to our bullpen. And then the team that hits last is going to be down a runner. If we can get 3 outs, we win the game. It's kind of like the last 2 minutes of an NBA game. There's not really a whole lot of drama
right.
Or not really a whole lot of predictions that need to take place because that's what it comes down to. So the essence of baseball for me as a quote unquote purist is put the ball in play, hit and run, play National League small ball like the Cardinals did, whitey ball. I mean, that's what I grew up watching. And again, not putting my head in the stand. The game is what the game is. It's my job to make it exciting, and it still is. But like chocolate ice cream versus Rocky Road, I prefer the chocolate over the Rocky Road. I prefer that style of baseball over what we're playing now. But if I had a choice, I'll take baseball of any kind.
That's great.
Yep.
Chip, we're really appreciative of your taking the time here, and we want to be respectful of that. So just wanted to wrap something up with a little bit more personal question. Your grandfather and your father were both broadcasters. Was it always an expectation that you and your brother would take part in the family business, or was that something that you both came by honestly?
Not at all. My grandfather and my dad, in fact, encouraged me not to do it. My maternal grandfather was the dentist in St. Louis, and I thought about going into pediatrics. I thought about law school because of a very, very influential law school professor at University of Georgia, where I went. No, it was never expected or demanded of me. They said, "Look, if you want to do this, here's what to expect." And the perception was, I was raised with a golden microphone in my crib, and my bottle was shaped like a microphone. None of that stuff took place. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old. My grandparents divorced when I was 2. I did not, or before I was even born, actually, I take that back. I didn't really know either one of them particularly well until I became an adult. And they offered me advice, which was tell the truth, be honest, and be yourself. They knew what was coming. And when you have 2 family members, your dad and your granddad, on national TV every night, it's probably very easy to fall into the trap of trying to sound like or be exactly like them. I'm the antithesis of both of them. I'm my own person. I do it my own way. I have things that pop up from time to time that maybe sound like or remind fans of either one of them. But it's just part of the DNA, and that part I can't help. But no, they never demanded of me to do it. I fell in love with the game listening to a radio call of my dad's going home from Fulton County Stadium. Bob Watson hit a walk-off grand slam homer. My dad had the home run call. Sent chills up my spine when I was a high school senior. And he said, I said, I want to do that someday. And the next day, he arranged an interview with me at TBS with the great Bob Wussler, where I went to work as an intern, rolling cable, running camera, handling audio duties, and was around the team an awful lot in a production capacity. But it was a great education, and it really just cemented for me that that's what I wanted to do, and haven't looked back and have no regrets.
Nice. You're a father of 4. Any of the kids have aspirations to follow in dad's footsteps?
2 of them so far. I have identical twin sons who are 21-year-old juniors at the University of Georgia. Yes, one of them is Kerry the fourth. He goes by Chris. They're both tremendously talented. They're far better than I was at their age. They're going to be working this summer in the Cape League. They've got a job with Katuitt doing radio and TV games. So they're going to get 2 months of play-by-play experience with the college kids in the Wood Bat League this summer, which I'm really proud of them for. And then I've got a 12-year-old son who is actually on his iPad every night looking at video clips with the sound down and doing play-by-play as well, which is all on his own. And maybe the most talented of the bunch is my oldest daughter. She's 23 years old. She's a singer, writer, dancer, and lives in Austin, Texas. She, however, is not going to do baseball broadcasting. So I'm really, really blessed. They're great kids. They're wonderful people. Forget the talent, which they obviously have. They're great people. Their mom did a wonderful job raising them in my absence when I'm gone for baseball season. And, their happiness and their personal growth is my greatest goal. And I'm really, really proud of what they've accomplished. And can't wait to see what they'll do next.
That's terrific. So Chip, as we wrap things up, why don't we give you a second to plug yourself? Where can our viewers and listeners find you on TV, on the internet, wherever they're looking?
Okay, sure. I've got a personal Facebook page. I'm not big on social media. I don't do Twitter and all that silliness, but I'm on Facebook, Chip Kerry. I am on Fox Sports South and Fox Sports Southeast. That's now a Sinclair regional sports network for the Atlanta Braves. If you have the baseball package, we're on there. But we'll be doing 155 games or so, counting 4 spring training games this year. And like you said, can't wait to get started in mid-February with pitchers and catchers reporting. And hopefully, as we say, with the Robin Redbreast approaching, spring's around, the sound of bat and ball and leather lets us know that America's headed back and baseball's back. And hopefully we can be a clarion call for that in 2021.
That's terrific. Thanks so much, Chip.
Okay,
and we'll
guys,
wrap things up here when we're not live on
Thanks.
Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. You can find the Team Arrivals anywhere and everywhere. Our website is teamarrivalspodcast.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Team Arrivals Podcast, and you can also find us on Twitter at Team Arrivals Pod. Send us an email at the show at teamarrivalspodcast.com. You can find Elliott at
TOR_Elliott.
And Ron is also on Twitter at
TOR_Ron.
And don't forget to check out our super producer Geno at Crash STL. If you are watching us live, you can always catch us anywhere you listen to podcasts, on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. And whether you watch us live or listen to us on the audio podcast, be sure to like and subscribe and leave us a comment or a review. You can easily review the show by going to ratethispodcast.com/TOR and following the simple instructions. And as always, don't forget to make your review a good one. And don't forget to check out the rest of the Gateway City Sports Network, including the Derek King Sports Show every Wednesday at 9 a.m. on Facebook Live and 2 for 3 with Moose Michaels. You can find all that and more at gatewaycitysports.com. Again, Chip, thank you so much. This was such a privilege for us, and loads of fun. And hopefully sometime we'll get to do it again in the future.
I would love to be back. You guys are great. Enjoy. Congratulations and much success. See you soon.
Sure.